Welcome to Hunden Happy Hour, where we share the stories behind the deals, developments, and decisions shaping destination real estate and the people making them happen. I'm Bethanie DeRose, Executive Vice President with the team at Hunden Partners, where we lead complex destination development from vision to reality. Built on decades of experiences across hundreds of cities, we have a playbook that helps turn ambitious ideas into built and successful projects. In today's episode, we'll delve into two multifaceted stories of Mammoth Lakes and Huntington Beach, incredible California destinations with similar dynamics and some key differences. One thing that links them both now is our guest, John Urdi. He's the former CEO of Mammoth Lakes Tourism and now the CEO of Visit Huntington Beach. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you and that sparkling beach background behind you of Huntington Beach. So you just got started in January of 26. You held this role as a CEO at Visit Mammoth Lakes for 15 years, and you've worked in the destination space for the bulk of your career. So we're really excited to have you here to talk about how all of these things come together and your experiences. But first of all, congratulations on the role. I need to know one thing before you get started. What's the temperature right now in Huntington Beach?
Do you really want to know where you're sitting? Because it's about 75 and sunny. It's been absolutely gorgeous. I have never seen a January in my career that looks like this, being that I'm a mountain guy. So the fact that we were on the beach on Monday celebrating MLK Day was exceptional.
Well, it sounds like you've earned it after many years in feet and feet of snow in the winter. I won't take it personally. We're looking at some negative wind chills, so I'm a little bit jealous, I have to be honest.
Oh, well, I get it. I think I've earned this one.
Absolutely. We would agree. I know Huntington Beach is still, relatively new for you, but tell us how you got there. What are some of those highlights along the way from your background in ski destinations and now in Surf City, USA? Tell us about how you've gotten to this place that you are at today in Huntington Beach.
Yeah, I mean, early on, I was very fortunate at Northeastern University. I did my co-ops in Vermont at Sugar Bush Resort, worked for them seasonally for the winters for 4 years in special events and ultimately marketing. Came out of school, became director of sales at a small ski area in New Hampshire, Attitash in North Conway. And just, my love of the industry was what got me there and really got my feet wet there. I was 13 years with American Skiing Company. We own 9 resorts across the country. I was the VP of marketing at Attitash in New Hampshire and just never felt like it was work because my job was to invite people to come have fun. From there, moved on to Colorado and was the VP of marketing for all 26 ski resorts with Colorado Ski Country, USA. And had a great time there. Ended up going to Wyoming for a few years at Grand Targhee. And then had this opportunity to come to Mammoth Lakes and basically found the DMO. So Mammoth Lakes Tourism was something that prior had been run through the town tourism and recreation office. The way I like to explain that is that they were in charge of getting people to come there and making sure the soccer fields got mowed. So not super focused on the visitor or the visitor experience. And so we founded MLT in 2010. And at the time we were, really a destination that was known for Mammoth Mountain ski area and happened to have a little town. And through the process that we'd gone through up there, we rebranded the town with the goal of being a world-class town that happens to have a world-class mountain. And so Mammoth Lakes has built its own name over the last 15 years. We took our funding to a different level and really put the town on the map. So the ski area has always been on the map. It's the third most visited ski resort in the country. And, to get the town its recognition that it deserves because it's an absolutely phenomenal place, as you've seen, both summer and winter. And so that brought me there. And then really the opportunity came here a few years ago, talking to my friend Kelly Miller. He was the outgoing CEO. He had told me 3 years ago that he was planning on retiring. And I really felt that I wanted to shift gears. And I think looking at one iconic destination to the next, I've gone from an iconic mountain destination to a very iconic beach destination, home of surfing, as you mentioned, Surf City, USA. And really the vibe, the people, the culture, the feeling, the experience, the soul of this place is very, very similar to the ski towns, with the exception of not having feet and feet and feet of snow.
There's so much in your background. I'm sure everybody that hears this will be envious of your career and the path that you've taken. getting to work, on the private sector at a resort company that owns these ski areas and is interested in development and growing those spaces. You've been to some iconic places. You've led iconic destinations. So people are probably jealous of that. But I think, behind the scenes, better than anybody that it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of support for the money and the management and the infrastructure that goes into these places. And you and I have talked a lot about that over the years, the inherent need that these communities, particularly resort communities, that they have and that reliance on tourism. I want to talk about some of the tools that you helped create, some of the things that you and Mammoth Lakes Tourism and the town of Mammoth Lakes put in place to support that destination development and your community overall. So when you came into MLT, what kind of challenges were you experiencing? And what were some of those goals of starting the organization that you had to try to develop it and bring it to where it is today?
Yeah, I think coming into it, the fact that there had not been a real focus on bringing outside business in, it was really whatever the ski area brought to town was what they had for business. Summer was an afterthought. It really was not something that was promoted. Being the Eastern Gateway to Yosemite National Park, that blows me away that they weren't even talking about the fact that they were right next to one of the largest national parks in the country. And so the opportunities were kind of endless. I think the challenges for me were coming from the private sector and coming into an NGO, so not a governmental organization, but very obviously very, very closely tied to it. So dealing with the politics of it, when you're working for a ski company and a ski resort directly, I'm dealing with my owner or my ownership group, and there's not a lot of red tape that you have to go through. If you get the go ahead from your owners, you can do things. Obviously, in a community, you've got to get community buy-in, you've got to get city council support, you've got to get the town manager support. And so all of those things take a long time. I think when we were looking at what we needed to do in Mammoth, it was something where, again, it was focused on winter. And the opportunity there was to start talking about, well, okay, let's hit the easy button and promote summer. And summer was July and August, and then we expanded it to June to September and all the way out into October when we started to promote the fall. So a lot of it comes down to education. You talk about the value of visitation. Mammoth Lakes lives and dies on visitation. It's 80% of the town's operating budget comes from TOT, bed tax, and sales tax, whereas here in Huntington Beach, it's 10% that comes from that. And so I think that it's really interesting to see that neither place really recognizes the value of tourism, and a place like Mammoth Lakes, there's so much reliance on it that it can't be avoided. And it has to be nurtured, it has to be protected, it has to be stewarded, which is exactly what you and I have been working on for the last however many years. So all critical stuff. And I think that really working on our funding was a big part to get us to a level that we could make those impacts and those changes and the growth for the community.
Yeah, you just talked about a couple of things that I want to unpack a little bit. You talked about funding as well as stewardship. When it comes to funding, Mammoth Lakes, particularly MLT, and then in partnership with the town, created new dynamics for funding. And then there was reinvestment from some of those funding initiatives that allowed for the town to do things like community housing projects, like an ice rink for the community. You mentioned 80% of the town's budget is coming really from that TOT, from the visitor spend. So can you talk a little bit about some of those initiatives that were catalytic from a funding mechanism standpoint and how that allowed for some reinvestment at the town level too?
Coming on board in 2010, I had not done enough of my research to figure out that the town was in the midst of a massive lawsuit. And by 2012, the town had lost a lawsuit for a breach of contract with a developer for the tune of $48.5 million. So a town that had probably an $18 million operating budget at that point is now in the hole trying to look at filing Chapter 9 bankruptcy. The courts told them they had too many assets, they couldn't. And so it came down to a one-time payment of $2.5 million and $2 million a year for 23 years. So, that was really kind of where we were before we put our funding model into place. And obviously, when something like that happens, you tighten your belts and everybody's budget goes down 20% in order to make the $2 million a year to pay that settlement. So when we looked at it, we looked at the funding model that was really prevalent in California and now is really going worldwide and nationwide in tourism business improvement districts. And so we were the 80th tourism business improvement district in the state of California. There are now over 115, I think. And all of them, even to this day, with the exception of one other, they're all based on lodging only. But because of our reliance on tourism, we looked at it and said, okay, let's do lodging, restaurant, retail, and the ski area. And so it's an assessment. It's not a tax. It's voted on by the businesses. So it's not any different than a P bid or any other bid that's out there that the businesses assess themselves. And the difference with the tourism business improvement district, they can pass it along to the visitor. So in that sense, we were able to take our budget from a marketing standpoint from about the $2 million mark when I started in 2010 to what I just left at about $11.5 million. And with that growth, we've been able to help the town with the funds to be able to do projects that the community needs, whether it's for visitation flow or whether it's for resident quality of life. So to give you an idea, the 10 years prior to the T-bid going into place in 2013, the average transient occupancy tax during that 10 years was $10.5 million. So it basically would ping pong from 9 million to 11 million, 10 million, 10.5 million, 9 million, 9.5 million. It wasn't going anywhere. And so we put the T-bid in place in September of 2013, started spending the money in May of 2014. And by June of 2015, we started to hit new marks with the bed tax. So we started to come in off of that $10.5 million average. We hit 15.7, 18.1, 20 million, 22 million, up to the peak, which was about 29.5 million just a few years ago. So it's given the town a lot more opportunity to solve some of the challenges that come with visitation and to enhance the quality of life. So one of the biggest things that is challenged there is it's a 4 square mile town with 7,000 residents. And after COVID, it was a challenge beforehand, but after COVID, most of the real estate was sold to second homeowners and they were put in Airbnbs or used. And so housing became a massive challenge. To date, the town has put about $50 million of visitor-based money coming in from TOT into the housing projects that they're building in town right now. 82 units were opened a year ago, October. Next 122 units are set to open sometime next year. So, it was really a growth model that allowed us to get to certain levels and taking care of our community.
The ability for Mammoth Lakes Tourism, through your marketing efforts in driving awareness, supported that tourism engine to the degree of the town's general fund contribution from TOT going from roughly 10 million to roughly 30 million. That's obviously significant and has allowed for town council, other elected officials, community leaders to advocate for investment in more outdoor recreation, in more public services, in transportation. One of the things that you and I have talked about a lot over the years is that need for reinvestment, that need for management, that need for stewardship. And there was an article I just read a couple weeks ago about sort of redefining tourism as infrastructure, and that it's not it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. That's clear in Mammoth Lakes because of the sort of size and scale of what the industry does for the community. There may be community members that it's a little too obvious and therefore they don't always love it. But part of what you and I started working on was a stewardship plan for Mammoth Lakes. So now going beyond awareness and beyond marketing to how do we take care of this place while still making sure that it performs? I was just in town last week, although you weren't there, which was sad. We missed you last week, but sitting with town officials and with key stakeholders, we started to really define stewardship and what does stewardship mean for Mammoth? What does stewardship mean for Huntington Beach? What does stewardship mean for San Francisco? it may have a different definition depending on what the destination needs, what the community needs. And we started to, at a very high level, very simplistic level, sort of came to a conclusion that in Mammoth Lakes, stewardship is a combination of continuing to keep the engine healthy. Part of tourism stewardship for Mammoth Lakes is reinvesting in the product, is reinvesting in the tourism assets and community need, building the supporting infrastructure that community needs to do that. I think in some places, stewardship is being characterized a little bit more on how do we take care of community and place. And still, even though it's coming from a tourism lens, the actual tourism product is almost being left out of that equation. And in our conversations last week in Mammoth, it became really clear that it's the center of the ecosystem and it has to be maintained. It has to be reinvested in. The product has to be world class in order to continue to drive that engine. So I know you're not on this project anymore, but when you think about stewardship for Mammoth Lakes, how do you react to that? Does that sound like what you would want to see continue in Mammoth?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I'll back up a little bit. So when I came on board in 2010 and we were facing the municipal bankruptcy, I was really charged with Mammoth Lakes Tourism bringing as much money to the community as we possibly could to minimize the impact of that lawsuit. So we were incredibly successful to the point where people complained that we brought too many people there. So there was some reshifting of thought at that point, and it was like, okay, we've proven that we can bring people here. Now we need to bring the respectful people here. We need to bring the people that are going to show our community and our environment the respect that it deserves. And I think that's really where the stewardship conversation came from. And so back prior to COVID, Council Member Wentworth and I were talking about restrooms in the Lakes Basin. And he would come to me and said, "You're bringing too many people here. You need to pay for restrooms." I said, "No, I'm bringing people here and the tax revenue is going to the town. They are the ones that need to manage the infrastructure. It's a municipal thing to manage." And I think you and I have had this conversation, and I'm happy to see that it's still on the door of my old office. But my latest quote is that it's not over tourism, it's under management. And so I think that's the biggest part of the stewardship messaging is how do we maintain the flow of people so that we don't have to ratchet it down, that we can just manage the amount of people that are coming in, whether it's through parking or traffic or utilizing the free bus system in town or trash and all of those different things. It's the stewardship of the community. So it's not just stewardship in the sense of the environment, but it's really taking care of the community and its inhabitants as well. And I think that that's a huge, huge piece of it because, I shied away from the word sustainability because when I would talk about sustainability in our community, I would have council members think we were talking about recycling cans. And so to me, it was really becoming stewards of our own community and asking our visitors to become stewards of it as well. We wanted people to come in and treat it like they own it. And that's where the Real Unreal marketing campaign came from was we don't want Mammoth Lakes to become real. You've been there. It looks like you're in a movie set. It looks like it's a green screen behind you. The last thing we want to do is have that become real. We don't want to, we don't want people escaping Los Angeles to come to Mammoth Lakes and then turning it into Los Angeles. And so keeping it unreal is a huge push and a very successful campaign.
It is beautiful. It does look like a movie set. It's hard to leave when you're there looking at blue skies and beautiful mountains. And I can understand why people drive 6 hours or fly across the country as I did and get up at 3:00 in the morning to get there and see it. And keeping that product at that world-class level is something that can't be an afterthought. That has to be the top of the pyramid. While we work on visitor dispersal, while we work on supporting infrastructure and amenities, while we make sure that if there's a rainy day, which there's not that much of in Mammoth, but if there is a rainy day, where are we going to direct people to and make sure that we capture that dollar, we capture that experience, and then it continues to benefit the place. Being a necessity and thinking about tourism as a necessity in Mammoth is different than Huntington Beach. I know that you're still new in Huntington Beach, but I'm sure you already have thoughts about this. So How is that different, or are there parallels in your new role there in Surf City?
In general, it's all the same. It's funny because whether it's a ski town or a beach town or a golf town, we all have the same challenges. We all have shoulder seasons. We all have slow times of the week. We all have slow times of the year. We all have events and activities to try and fill the gaps. We have media perceptions. Right now I'm dealing with some political challenges here in Huntington Beach that have caused negative impacts for the city, and it's based on some of the news that goes out there about this destination. So a lot of our opportunity here is to make sure that all the positive news and all the welcoming news is out there. I love to garden, and I always say that the best way to keep weeds out of your garden is to plant more flowers. And I think that when we start to see some of the negativity coming out of here, we want to make sure that we increase that tenfold in the positivity to make sure that that drowns out that. So it's a little bit different because, again, really within the city itself, the beach is 10 miles long, and our real footprint is from the Kimpton, where my office is here in the hotel, to the Hyatt on the other end of the Pacific Coast Highway. It's 1 mile. And then it's about 3 blocks in that really makes up the visitor destination for Huntington Beach. So it's a much similar concentration of space, but it's a little bit different in the way it's thought of. I mean, we have companies like Boeing here. When you talked about Mammoth Lakes living on tourism, I always used to joke that the agricultural season in Mammoth is 2 weeks. And there is no technology, there is no manufacturing, there is no agriculture. Here there are technologies, there are other businesses. So tourism is not the lead dog here, but it is such a huge piece, and it's what most people know about Huntington Beach. They don't necessarily know that Boeing is here. They just know about the surf culture, the beaches, the fire pits, the ambiance, the whole vibe of this place. And so I think that it's very similar in that it's a microcosm of the whole place that makes up tourism here. So, but very much, right now I'm looking at it saying we only do 25% of our visitors are staying overnight. 75% are coming in for the day, using the beach and leaving, and probably not spending a ton of money. And so the opportunities here are to bring in more of the overnight visitor. Whereas Mammoth was well more than, it's over 80% overnight visitor. And, you'd have a handful of people that would come in from places like Reno, or even get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive from LA and ski and then go home. So it's different challenge, but very, very similar atmosphere.
We're going to pause the conversation for what we like to call sip and spill. This is our quick fire Q&A. It's a chance for our audience to get to know you and your destination a little better. Ready to spill? Give us your favorite happy hour.
Okay, so when you come out here, I'm going to take you to Bell. It's a rooftop restaurant and bar that's basically has the view that you see behind me. So sunset is fairly ridiculous up there, and it's probably position A for happy hour.
Sounds great. Favorite sports venue?
If I'm going to go with watching sports, I'm going to go with longboards here in town because I'm a Patriots fan, and we actually do have a Patriots bar here, which makes me very, very happy.
Okay. Favorite arts and culture venue?
The International Surf Museum is a pretty cool place. Pretty amazing history here with Duke Kahanamoku and George Freeth coming here back in the early days of surfing and kicking this place off.
I'm sure this one is a long list, but favorite dinner reservation?
That's going to be a restaurant called Jolie. And Jolie is actually just below Bell and has the same view as behind me in my picture here. But the food is phenomenal and the view is equally phenomenal.
Favorite coffee shop?
I'm a tea guy. And so I got to say 602 is right next to my office here. I probably have like 10 coffee shops within 5 seconds of my office here, but 602 is a place you can get an acai bowl and a matcha in the morning. So it's a good one.
What about favorite citywide or annual event?
I've never seen the air show. There's a huge Huntington Beach air show that comes in October, and I'm guessing that that's going to blow my socks off as well. So US Open of Surf is cool. This is the 50th year for WSL coming in for championships as well. And PT Townend, who's on my board, in a board meeting the other day, he let us know that 50 years ago when the WSL championship started, he was the first champion. So that's pretty cool to see.
What about your favorite place to bring visitors?
The beach.
Hard to beat.
Hard to beat.
What's the part of Huntington Beach you want to explore more of?
We have Huntington Beach Central Park. It's 375 acres right in the middle of the city. And it's got restaurants and equestrian areas, and it's got the second oldest disc golf course in the country, if not the world. It's just a massive place that I have not really gotten out to explore.
And then last one, favorite spot on the beach.
It's probably going to be the one that's right 3 blocks from my house. We walked on Monday, and it was 9 minutes from our front door to the water, and so we're right kind of in between the pier and Dog Beach, and so it's kind of a little bit quieter side of the beach, so it's not as crazy as you get down towards the pier, and gets pretty packed. So I'm going to say Tower 14 on my side of the beach.
Can't wait to come see it sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Great. That's Sip and Spill. Now that we know you and your destination a little better, we're going to jump back into the conversation. I know that you and I spent a lot of time talking about the stewardship plan for Mammoth Lakes before we got started, and obviously before you took your new role. But when you thought about getting that project started and getting it off the ground, what made you think about working with us and the services that we could provide for Mammoth, for you, for your team?
Yeah, I think so. To back it up a little bit, we started talking about doing a destination management plan back in probably 2018 before COVID. And there was a feeling that the town could accomplish that they could set the roadmap up for us and that we could do that internally, which was definitely clearly not the case. And so after we came out of COVID, after we saw the spikes in our business, after we saw some of the disrespect for the community and the environment, it really opened up our eyes to the fact that this had to happen, and it had to become a destination stewardship plan. Management plan, I think if I look at something in working with Hunden here in Huntington Beach, it's a destination management plan. But with Mammoth, it was definitely a destination stewardship plan. And you and I had worked on another project, and I felt that really what you brought to the experience and what you brought from a management standpoint, I really wanted to continue that. And with you joining Hunden, it was really a natural progression for us. And with our prep and with us working for the last 6 months on this project before I moved, it's really proven to be the right move, and I would highly recommend it. And like I said, if we do something here as a destination management plan, it would be a no-brainer to start working with you again on that here in Huntington.
I do look forward at some point to buying you drinks out on that one of those restaurants and rooftop bars you mentioned in Huntington Beach. I know we're not done in Mammoth Lakes, so we will certainly. I will make sure that you see the end product, and I know that it's a passion of yours to see it, even though you're not there anymore. But now that we have been involved for the last couple of months and working closely together on this. You mentioned having your eyes opened after COVID and having to deal with some of those challenges. Once we started working together, were there any other surprises once you had that outside perspective, or things that you thought maybe surprised your council or your partners in town about having outside perspective brought in?
Yeah, I think there always is. I think fresh set of eyes always wakes things up that you weren't necessarily looking at. I think that we have in Mammoth Lakes, I think there are a lot of opportunities that get missed. And even being here now in Huntington Beach for just shy of a month, talking to my team and throwing out some things that I think are pretty basic are news to them. And so I think there's always that fresh perspective. And so having Hunden coming in and having you come in with the idea that you've been working on this in other places and seen other things and have maybe some recommendations, and you're hearing things from a different standpoint than maybe somebody who's been in the community for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, really, I think was the biggest eye opener, is that, even things like some of the things with the water district that are opportunities. And, I think that those are things that I'm not sure many people that are so close to it would have even looked for or heard or asked the questions about. So I think having that outside perspective is really a massive opportunity for any destination to have.
Yeah, I wish you were in the room last week when we were having one of these conversations with community members and leaders, and the need for hospitality focused workforce housing has continued to come up, right? And we know that you really pioneered, as you mentioned, an investment strategy that allowed for $50 million of tourism-related revenues to be invested in housing on the sort of tourism product development standpoint and tourism reinvestment. We just had a conversation last week where members of town leadership said, oh, don't worry about housing. You can carve that out. We have a housing plan. And we said, we know you have a housing plan, but there are some things that maybe restrict who can get into that. And so we came up with some new ideas I wanted to run by everybody. And what could a private sector housing co-op that we've seen in other places, and that's a loose term, right, for just describing it, but what would that look like here? And we have a water district, we have a hospital system, we have the ski area, we have a lot of private sector partners that are competing for housing. And what could that look like here? And that was another eye-opening moment where sitting around the table with those leaders went, oh, that's a great idea. We should do that. How can we do that? So we went from don't worry about it to, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's figure out how to do it. And so now we're able to advance those conversations and work it into the stewardship plan. And so those eye-opening moments happen in these processes almost all the time, which is great. But it is a process to sort of get those eyes open and make sure that we're in a position to help educate, inform, and ultimately get something built and developed that's going to be impactful.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it too is you can't have the complacency of, oh, we've solved that problem. I mean, how many schools do you see that build a brand new school and then all of a sudden put the temporary classrooms next to it because they didn't build it big enough? There's always going to be that need. And so I think that even though there are 500 units that are in process and probably will be built by the 2029, 2030 in Mammoth, and it's probably one of the most aggressive housing programs in the country as far as a mountain destination. But is it going to be enough in 5 years, or is the need going to go up even more? And so I think that those are the opportunities that you have out there when you bring somebody in that can look at these things. And yeah, the mountain goes out and rents motels in Bishop in the wintertime, and the hospital goes out and buys units, and water district does programs for their employees. How do you get all of those together so that it's more of a, like you said, I think a co-op of housing with at least taking care of those needs? Because if you take care of those needs, you probably free up a heck of a lot of inventory in town for other needs.
You've talked a lot about some of those lessons learned, experiences that you've had. What connections do you see between some of those lessons about redevelopment, reinvestment, collaboration, and the lessons others in your role, your counterparts across the country might experience in their places? Any advice on those lessons learned?
Yeah, I think really starting to look at them as soon as possible. I think that really getting the analysis of what your community has and what your community needs, and then looking at the steps of how do you get to those needs, how do you answer those needs. Here I'm hearing we have a tourism enhancement program that we put about $1 million a year into to work with the city, and there are quite a few programs, whether it's you're replacing restrooms on the beach or lighting on the pier or lighting on Pacific Coast Highway because it's dark at night in certain sections right here in downtown. But it's how do I identify those things? And I think the other side of it too is that we all know that the municipalities themselves sometimes get hamstrung with timing, and moving at the speed of government is really difficult for me to handle, and I think a lot of my counterparts across the country, when we know we could get something done in a matter of months. So I also think looking at how you can do the public-private partnership so that you can maybe take on some of those initiatives. It's funny, you talked about the stewardship plan. That is, even though I'm not there for the finish of it, that's a piece I'm incredibly proud of, and I do feel as part of my legacy in Mammoth Lakes. And it was funny because I've been working or trying to get the Forest Service to allow us to renovate the restrooms at the Welcome Center for the last 8 years. Because basically, if you picture circa high schools circa 1971 restrooms, that's pretty much what's at the Welcome Center, and not very welcoming. And so I think as my parting gift, the Forest Service called me and said, hey, we're going to work this into the town's agreement so that you can, that the town can actually do the renovation in April and be ready for 4th of July this year. So it is those little victories, but it's making sure that if we're looking at it as something that's going to be good for our community and good for our visitors, that you are the champion for it. And it may take 8 years to get your bathroom done, but you really have to be there. And I think what we're doing with Hunden in Mammoth is helping to identify, solidify, and to build that roadmap so that it's undeniable that these are the things that have to happen. This is who's responsible. This is when it's supposed to happen. This is where the funding comes from, so that it is something that everybody can point to and say, hey, we're supposed to have a parking lot in the Lakes Basin by 2029. The permit needs to be done in the next, 10 months in order to get that to happen. Who's on top of it? So I think that there's so much, there's bird dogging. That's what everybody needs to do, is they need to make sure that there's a roadmap, but make sure that people are following it.
I think the thing that you said there at the end about being the bird dog, right? I think one of the biggest takeaways from working with you and watching what you've done in Mammoth and over the course of your career is that you've been an advocate, and that not being afraid to step into that space of, this is what the destination needs, and I'm not going to go away. And we've got to find a way to reinvest. We've got to find a way to enable these things. And there will always be challenges, but being an advocate and continuing to sort of pound the door on what we need for our community and what we need for our destination to be successful. And so you've done an excellent job of continuing to be an advocate for your destination. I know you'll do a great job of that in Huntington Beach. We have sort of a magic wand question that I want to pose to you. We're asking all of our guests about what you would do if you had that magic wand. Is there another challenge that you would like to tackle? What kind of expertise or partnership would it take to get it right? And how does that shape how you think about partnership going forward? Sort of the positioning of your organization, the positioning of tourism overall. If you had that magic wand, what's the challenge you would tackle, and what do you need to do it?
It would be the bureaucracy. It would be the competing interests. It would be the challenges of actually getting things executed. I think one of the things that I was always struggling with in Mammoth Lakes, and again, it's no different than any other destination, is that most of the time, and I think this may have been one of the fears of even hiring Hunden that I had to put to rest, was we're going to hire a consultant. They're going to come in, they're going to give us great roadmap, and we're going to put a binder on the shelf next to the 3 other binders that have said the same thing to the contractors that we spent $300,000 for in the last 10 years. And I think that it comes down to that execution. And I don't know whether, I think the bureaucracy is a lot of that. I think the red tape, I think the pushback, but I think the whole purpose of this destination stewardship plan is to have it on paper and have it open on the town manager's desk, on the public works director's desk, on the tourism person's desk, on the chamber's desk, on the mountains desk, on the water district's desk. Everybody is looking at this and saying, hey, today's January 22nd, we're supposed to be doing a permit for a parking lot in the Lakes Basin in the next 3 weeks. Who's doing it? Making it more active as opposed to passive, or, yeah, it's great, we talked about this. Oh yeah, parking lot in the Lakes Basin. Yeah, we didn't get the permit for that. It can't happen that way. It has to be active. It has to be proactive, and it has to be owned. So I think eliminating that bureaucracy is really the biggest thing that I would wave the wand for, other than waving a wand to make sure that every single visitor that came to the area was respectful. If I could do that, I'd do that first.
Yeah, that's a big task. We're all working towards it, right? Everybody in the industry is talking about visitor education, and I know it's been exacerbated post-COVID, but that need to address bureaucracy and be in a position to take action, I think that is something that we talk about a lot, and we build our plans to be those roadmaps so people can take action, and the opportunity to position the organization, not to have the quintessential seat at the table, but to build the table from the legs up. That part of partnership, the role of the DMO, the role of you and your counterparts across the country and internationally is shifting. And it's shifting in a good way, not just to talk about, marketing to management, but shifting in a way to be the advocate so that those things get implemented and we can reinvest in the industry. And that is something that, I think is going to take time for people to see and do and really understand their role. But watching the work that you've done in Mammoth Lakes, the way that the organization has been positioned is a great example for others across the country. And I know you'll do a great job in that role in Huntington Beach as well. So thank you, John.
Thank you
for offering your invaluable insights. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Hunden Happy Hour. We'll see you next time.